I'm Lieutenant Colonel Brian McKay. I'm the Chief of Operations here at the Air Force Academy. And around the table, I have Dr. Jordan Steele, Major Aaron Allman, and Major Michelle Floyd. Tonight, we're going to talk to you about the COVID vaccine and a little bit of the data and science. We recognize that it's been a few months since the vaccine has been out, and so we just wanted to kind of give you some of the lessons learned that we have had and have some of the experts around the table provide information on vaccine specifics from the data and the science perspective. And as we wrap up the formal portion, I'll give you some of the operational impacts, what it means to you to actually get the vaccine, specifically for those here stationed at the Air Force Academy, cadets and permanent party. The question and answer section of the chat is open, and we will be monitoring those as we go along. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer those. We're going to try to keep this to 45 minutes to 1 hour. So we'll call 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time our finish time. But until then, this this group of experts is ready to answer your questions. We're going to spend about the next 10 minutes going through some of the science and data. So with that, if you will please bring up the slides, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Steele.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for everyone that's joining us. We're super excited to talk about vaccines and talk about coronavirus. I mean, this is a new thing, right? This global pandemic is something that is taken the world by storm, and we're excited. It's shocked lots of things, and it's good that you have questions and want to learn more. So thank you for joining us. We're really excited. Okay, so I want to just jump in and give some background. So I'm going to, you've probably heard of COVID-19, right? And probably SARS-CoV-2. So my question is, what is the actual difference between those two? So COVID-19 is the actual disease. It's the coronavirus induced disease from 2019. And SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19. So similar to how HIV causes AIDS, SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that causes COVID-19. So you may hear today as we're talking, we may talk about SARS-CoV-2, and in some cases we're talking about COVID-19. And I just wanted to start off and make sure we're clear that the COVID-19 is the disease. That's what the vaccine is trying to prevent. It's trying to prevent COVID-19 disease. And SARS-CoV-2 is the actual virus that's getting in and infecting. And also to start this off, I just wanted to bring this back into the context that this is from the US. But we're still very much in the thick of things as far as this outbreak. We've had over 30 million cases in the US, and over 500,000 people have died in the last year due to this coronavirus. If you look at the case numbers there, we're still we have a lot of cases, and we need to still do more in order to bring this down so we can save more lives. So we're excited, and then we're going to do that by vaccination. Vaccination is how we're going to end this pandemic. So we're excited to talk about it. Just a quick overview of the virus and how it works. This is a coronavirus. The coronavirus, it's called the coronavirus because of the big spike proteins on the outside. If you look, it looks almost like a crown on the outside. That's why it's called a coronavirus. So those spike proteins on the outside is how it gets into your cells. So your cells have receptors, and the spike proteins, the virus is going to come down, and those spike proteins going to interact with the receptor, and that's going to trick your cell into bringing it in. And so then the virus gets into your cell, and it's going to start making copies of itself. It basically takes the cell hostage and it turns your cell into a virus factory and starts producing little viruses that will then assemble and then come out of your cells. And that's what an infection looks like. The virus gets in, makes more viruses, and then leaves the cell. Normally what happens during infection, when the virus leaves your cell, you have an awesome immune system. And so your immune system is able to recognize anything that's foreign, and it can recognize this coronavirus as, hey, this doesn't belong here. It'll actually take in that coronavirus, and it will process it. And it will take off the spikes and the different parts and pieces, and will present it to your immune system to trigger an immune response. Your immune system is beautiful, and it's very complex, but it has two main branches. You have B cells and T cells, and not to get into too many details, but those cells are going to initiate a response that's going to help fight off the infection and prevent infections in the future. So you activate B cells that are going to make something called antibodies that float around, and you're going to make cytotoxic T cells that can fight and get rid of infected cells. And with those two branches, with B cells and T cells and antibodies, you can prevent and get rid of the infection. The nice thing is after you clear an infection, you have what are called memory cells that are showing up at the bottom of the slide. And you have memory B cells and memory T cells that can then, they stick around for years. So the next time you're exposed to one of these coronavirus, your body can fight it off and you won't get sick, or you won't get as severe of a COVID disease or a disease in general. So this is natural immunity, what happens, and we try to mimic this with vaccines. So I'm going to turn it over to Major Almond, who can talk a little bit more about vaccines and the different types of vaccines.
So there are 4 main classes of vaccines, and those are just based on the methodology that we use to try and get your body to start fighting off these infections before it's actually exposed to a potential pathogen. So the ones that we're going to focus on today are going to actually be nucleic acid. So you may have heard of the mRNA vaccine. So that is going to be your Pfizer and your Moderna. So we'll talk about that one. Then you also have your viral vector. So this is going to be the Johnson & Johnson and then the AstraZeneca. Next slide, please. So before we go down into the nitty-gritty, let's take a step back so that we're all clear on what these terms actually are. So hopefully this is a throwback to a bio class you've taken at some point, but this is the central dogma of biology. So you start with DNA. This is your genetic code. This is what makes you you. This is unique for every single person. From your DNA, which is this massive assortment of genes, you make these little things called RNA. So this is what is actually going to code for your proteins. So this is what is going to actually take all of that information and make it into you. And that mRNA is the important part in the case of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So the M in mRNA stands for messenger. So all it is doing is taking this message from the DNA that's in your nucleus and in a normal cell using it to make proteins. So if you'll go. So in the case of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, we're taking advantage of this process that your body is doing already. So we are going to provide it with a piece of RNA, a messenger RNA, that in this case, instead of having the code for eye color, hair color, height, it's going to actually have the code for spike protein. So not something that we make normally, but something that will alert our body to the fact, hey, there is a virus here that should not be here. So we put that little message inside this lipid coat, and the lipid coat is just what allows it to enter our cell. So our cells are pretty good at keeping out things that don't belong there. So this just allows it to slip on through. So once inside, we're going into that mRNA to protein part of that central dogma. So you have this message and your body looks at it and goes, oh, mRNAs, I know what to do with this. I have these all the time. So it looks at that message and starts making these viral proteins. So since this viral protein doesn't actually have a role in your cell, because again, we don't need spike proteins, it kicks it out of the cell and in some cases displays it on the outside, which then triggers the immune response. So you still get that spike protein, you still get that immune response without actually having to get the virus, because instead you just have this little messenger that told your cell to make it without any of the viral implications. So then the other one that's available, the viral vector vaccines. So in this case, Johnson & Johnson, and in some other parts of the world, you also have AstraZeneca. This is a different technique. So this is a viral vector technique. And what that means is we're using, in this case, an adenovirus. So this virus has been modified. So adenoviruses generally cause like the common cold, but we have taken that and made it so it's no longer active. So it has all of the machinery to get into your cells, just like the coronavirus does. But once it gets in there, it can't make more copies of itself. So instead of making you sick, it actually is just carrying in that spike gene. So then this spike gene goes into your body, again, does that DNA to RNA to protein and kicks out spike proteins. So these are 2 different ways that you have the instructions for how to make the virus particle piece, that spike gene that is actually going to trigger an immune response without having to actually get the virus. So at the current pace, this slide is just showing that we have about 32% of Americans who have gotten at least their first dose. So about 18% of Americans have been vaccinated, which is awesome. So this time last year, it was a real struggle to see if we would get a vaccine, let alone how quickly. So we've made wonderful strides in being able to not only get vaccines available, but to disseminate them. So while we're at 32%, one of the important numbers that we're trying to reach is this at least 70 to 80%, because that is where herd immunity kicks in. So we have this fight going on in each of our bodies where we're able to produce this spike protein and ward off coronavirus, but that's only effective on a large scale when a certain number of people have it. So we're trying to get to that 70 to 80% range, but when they took the poll back when the first vaccine started coming out, so again, December, a lot of information has come out since then, the acceptance rate was about 50%. So at the Air Force Academy, we're doing a lot better than that, but we still need to make sure that as many people as possible in our community are getting the vaccine so that they're able to, one, prevent coronavirus disease, but also so we're able to save some of our more vulnerable members of our populations.
All right, so I appreciate our experts from the biology department giving us a lesson in the vaccine and what it means, how it was developed, and why it's here and why it's effective. So here are some of the operational impacts specifically for the cadets and permanent party at the Air Force Academy. Currently, as everyone knows, we're doing nearly 100% of the cadet wing every week. We're testing them to see if they have COVID. So once you are fully vaccinated, which is 2 weeks past your second dose, in the way we're doing it here, that means you no longer have to be part of the surveillance testing, as we define it here at USAFA. Now, I won't say that you will never be tested, because the Department of Defense still has a larger surveillance testing program out there. And so as we ramp down our program here at USAFA, we still fall under a larger program. But those numbers are very, very small, and the chances of you actually being tested are probably fairly slim. Second, and probably the bigger piece and more near and dear to cadets' hearts, is that if you are a close contact, you're not going to have to go into quarantine. And that is per CDC, and we've been able to validate how that works here at USAFA. So while we will still notify you of being a contact, and we will know that you are a contact, we're not going to put you up in Q&I. Now, I'm going to emphasize, you're still going to monitor symptoms at all times. And if you get sick, and if you wind up down at the clinic and they test you and you are COVID positive, you will go to isolation. And that's just because that is the current medical practice, is to remove this highly infectious disease from the population. And we have no other guidance that would, at the moment, lead us to go from that. Operational readiness. So this is kind of something that a lot of people don't think about, but there's two parts to this. First, for you firsties out there, as you get ready to graduate and go on to your next assignments, whether that be an actual assignment in a leadership role, or you go to a training pipeline, being at your job, your location, your duty station is important. So having to quarantine or isolate actually affects the readiness of your unit. And if you're in a training pipeline, we have such tight timelines that if you miss a day or two of training, you could actually be rolled back to the next class. And when that next class is going to happen is not always guaranteed. So you could be sitting in your training pipeline for a long time. And then that final bullet down there, this is, I hope everyone will take note of this. Reduce travel restrictions. Right now, there are 15 countries that allow you to travel to and from their country if you can prove that you are fully vaccinated. And so, and that list is growing weekly. In fact, just today, I read that Hawaii is actually looking to do this as a state. I know it's not a country, but by May. And so as more and more people get vaccinated, more and more international travel and outside of our borders is going to be permitted by means of being vaccinated, which means you won't have to test or quarantine when you get to those locations, both which can be time consuming and a hindrance on your travel. So those are some of the operational impacts. We've kind of gone through the science, we've kind of gone through some of the data, and what we're going to do now is we have the questions coming in on the chat, and so what I will do is I'm going to kind of read them and I'll open it up to our panel of experts here. So if we can please take down the slides, we will we'll start answering some of these questions here. So the first question that's come up a couple times is whether or not the vaccine is designed for immunity or to just reduce the severity of the symptoms.
So is it okay if I take this? So any vaccine is designed, I would say both. I mean, so it's vaccines are designed to trigger immunity, to have those memory cells, the B cells and T cells, that they'll persist and provide you protection in the future. We were kind of talking earlier, a vaccine is not perfect. We know that it's not 100% effective. And just because you have a vaccine and you have those memory B and T cells doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to come in contact with the virus, or that the virus is going to be able to sneak in and infect a couple of your cells. But if it does still sneak in and infect a couple of your cells, the immunity that you have from that vaccine is still going to reduce the symptoms and the severity of that disease. So I would say both, that the vaccine is going to help protect and prevent you from getting the infection, but it's also going to help if you are one of the unlucky people in that 5% that still get COVID-19 even after vaccination, it is going to reduce the severity of that disease so that you are less likely to go to the hospital or less likely to succumb and pass away from that infection.
All right, thank you. Let's see, next, can someone describe the difference between the EUA and FDA approval and why the timelines are a little bit different?
Okay.
Sure, I can do it. So the emergency use authorization.
Turn this slide up.
Oh.
Yeah, can we have the slide actually come up? Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in and do this one as well. So this is a terrific question. So EUA stands for Emergency Use Authorization. And it is, I mean, this is when pandemics are happening. When we're having an outbreak, you may have an EUA where there's an emergency and we have to authorize use in an unusual situation. Normally, if you look at this figure on the right-hand side, you'll see the normal FDA approval process. Normally, when you have an investigational new drug, when there's a new drug or a new vaccine that's supposed to help save lives and prevent sickness or death, they'll go through a full FDA approval process where they test and they do clinical trials, different phases of clinical trials. And then they're very careful and cautious with that, and they have a lot of external reviews to make sure they are safe and effective. In an EUA, they don't take out any of those safety measures. It's all the same all the check boxes have to be made, the timing, the size of the study. The only thing that's different is they move production up. So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see they normally do testing and then they get approval and then they'll go into production and distribution. In an EUA, because of a global pandemic or a dire need that we need this as soon as possible, they actually will allow production to occur at the same time as clinical testing. But the key thing here is that the clinical testing is not, they don't cut any corners, or there's nothing that's out of line with the testing. They don't speed it up or anything. They make sure it's the same requirements for the full FDA approval and the EUA. I think Major Allman's going to add something.
So of note, I know a lot of people have been concerned about being rushed through and not getting enough participants. But so for Pfizer, for example, there's been over 44,000 participants, and the normal vaccine is around 20 to 30. So they're not only meeting, but in a lot of cases, they're actually exceeding the requirements to get that full FDA approval. So it's not that there are any corners being cut in terms of effectiveness or in terms of safety. It is really just that production piece, that they're able to take some risk and move it up so that we're able to get this vaccine in a timely manner because it is a global pandemic.
Thank you. And I think this question kind of ties in line with that. Is this the first mRNA vaccine?
That's a great question. So let's talk about it. So this is an mRNA vaccine, and we did have one in 2019. The first mRNA vaccine was used against Ebola and was actually FDA approved, and went through the whole process that you're seeing on the right. So the Ebola vaccine, we had a big outbreak of Ebola in 2013 to 2016. following that outbreak, there was a lot of money to put towards research, and they developed a vaccine. And in 2016, they went through the whole FDA approval process and have been able to get full FDA approval for the Ebola mRNA vaccine. And so that was last summer. So that's the first time. Right now we're under an EUA for the mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. But I do want to address that. So a lot of people are worried, saying that mRNA vaccine, this is a new technology, that it's scary or questionable. We've been working with mRNA for over 3 decades, and it's been proven, and it's very safe and effective. RNA vaccines are actually really awesome because it's. I'm actually going to let me go back to this slide. Like Major Almond had mentioned before. So Major Almond had mentioned this. So mRNA is a messenger. It's meant to be transient, and it's not very stable, right? DNA is the molecule in your cells that's long-term storage and very safe or very stable. mRNA comes in and it's transient and gets degraded. So when we're using an mRNA vaccine, it gets into your cell, but it's going to stay in the cytoplasm, like we saw with this little picture right here. It gets in, it's going to make proteins, but then it doesn't mess with your DNA. It doesn't go into the nucleus at all. So kind of going back to the initial question, this is not the first mRNA vaccine. This technology has been around for a long time. The reason why it hasn't been more prevalent and widespread is because mRNA is inherently unstable. So you probably have heard these vaccines have to be kept at ultra low temperatures, like -70 degrees. And so that's kind of a difficult thing for actual application and logistics, is keeping these things frozen at these ultra low freezers. So mRNA vaccines have never had the opportunity to be in the spotlight and to show how awesome they are because of that hurdle. But because with the global pandemic, we had the opportunity to test them out, and they're remarkable. I don't know, anything else to add on mRNA vaccines?
And they've also bought us some time, right? So they're not a technology that's more typically thought of in terms of vaccines. But like Dr. Steele said, it's not because they're not effective, it's just because they're unstable and quite frankly, a pain. But because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, we're able to at least start vaccinating some people so that a vaccine like Johnson & Johnson can come online, so that the AstraZeneca can come online, some that have more potential to be more widespread into some of those more rural communities and that may not have access to that -70 degrees. So they've really done us a favor in helping get vaccines in arms earlier, while the rest of the more stable technologies can catch up.
So that is a great segue into the next question, which is one brand of vaccine better than the other, say Johnson & Johnson versus Pfizer or Moderna?
So do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the CDC and we just don't have any recommendation as far as which one to get. We recommend that, to get whatever you're available to get, whatever opportunity you have to go ahead and get that one. There are some people who have medical conditions. If they're allergic specifically to the certain vaccine components, they should get the other version of it. So if they have, peg allergy or anaphylaxis to those things, they should, consider a different vaccine, not the mRNA, the Moderna and Pfizer ones. They should get the Johnson & Johnson, but those are very uncommon. And so honestly, they should get whatever vaccine that's offered to them.
All right, and now one more question on this kind of topic is, can they request a certain vaccine? And if not, why not?
So at this point, Department of Air Force and is only getting so many allotments of certain types of vaccines. And for the Air Force Academy, we've only been tagged to get Pfizer at this point. We do have Moderna out at Fort Carson, but the DoD is giving more Johnson & Johnson, and the more stable, logistically able to transport to remote locations to our more remote locations, like our deployed locations and our OCONUS locations, because shipping is not as difficult out there. So the Johnson & Johnson are going to those locations preferentially than to us. So eventually we probably will have multiple vaccines here at the Air Force Academy, but currently your choice is Pfizer for like the next couple of weeks. So.
All right, so the most asked question is the long-term side effects. And how can we know that there are no long-term side effects if we've been in this for such a relatively short period of time?
So That's a great point, right? We've been in this pandemic for a year, so we barely know the long-term side effects of COVID because we've been dealing with it for a year. So how can we possibly know the long-term side effects of a vaccine that's been around for months? So there are a couple of things to consider when you're considering that question. So one is we may not know the long-term effects, but you can compare them to what we do know about the disease. So in terms of severity, long-term potential effects of a vaccine compared to COVID, we know some of the long-term effects of COVID and it's not great. Whereas in general, these technologies are safe and they're effective. So while we can't be sure what it's going to look like 10 years from now, we can say that based on the data we have right now, and it continues to emerge every day as more and more studies come out, the risk of getting the vaccine is much, much lower than the risk of actually getting COVID. So one of the most common questions that I've heard in general is in regards to fertility. So that's one of the questions that commonly comes up. It's not just long-term effects of the vaccine, but specifically how does that relate to fertility in women? So a lot of this stems back down to the fact that in the placenta, there is a protein called syncytin. Probably said that wrong, but anyway, syncytin, which is part of the placenta. It's required for it to do all of the things that your placenta does. And there is a small region of that protein that looks like the spike protein in this vaccine and in COVID, right? Because the spike protein is from that coronavirus. So there was a claim months ago that having your body produce this spike protein is going to cause an autoimmune response against your own placenta and cause infertility. So there are a couple ways you can address that question as well. So the first is that if that was caused by the vaccine, it would also most assuredly be caused by the virus itself. So you'd be able to see that in the data. So you would see this boom of infertility because now millions of people have had coronavirus and they just haven't seen that yet. And then from a biological perspective, having some small region that's the same is not the same as having the same protein. So the best way I've heard it explained is we all have phone numbers. So 7 digits, 10 digits, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So just because my phone number has a 7 in it and Major Floyd's phone number has a 7 in it does not mean that you can call Major Floyd when you're trying to call me. There's so much dissimilarity that one little bit of similarity is not going to actually cause an immune response. So to date, there has been no actual proof that this small amount of homology is going to be enough to actually cause some type of immune response against your own placenta. And if we did, again, you would expect it not just with the vaccine, but also with the virus, because it's that same protein. There's nothing really different other than how it got into your body.
And let's be clear. So that COVID-19 can infect your reproductive tract. So SARS-CoV-2 can get in and infect cells in your reproductive tract. And so that question is legitimate. We don't know what the long-term effects of COVID-19 are going to be on reproductive tract. But we have no evidence that the vaccine is going to affect the reproductive tract at all. And the fact that it's an RNA vaccine, it's not stable, it's not going to be persistent or existing in any of your tissues or systems, for long at all.
And we also know that at this point, there have been several women who have been pregnant and had COVID, the disease, and their health outcomes are much more severe having the disease. And we've also had several pregnant women at this point get vaccinated. There have also been pregnant women who were involved in the clinical trials. In both of those cases, they have had no issues. So as the disease, you're actually more disposed to some of those complications that we're trying to avoid with the vaccine. There have been no incidences to date of any issues with the vaccine itself, only with the virus.
And I would like to chime in that the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and other societies that help take care of pregnant women or women who want to get pregnant, that they advocate that you should get the vaccine in the priority that you're given. Like if you're given the opportunity to get the vaccine because of what Major Allman just said, that the risk of getting COVID, the disease, while pregnant can increase your risk of hospitalization and severe disease, and then therefore complicate that pregnancy that you're carrying, than as if you didn't get COVID. So like, that's why they want the vaccine to be given, even if you're pregnant or if you're before you're pregnant, so that it reduces your risk of the severity of getting COVID, the disease. So.
All right, so maybe a policy question or two in here is, if we're all getting the vaccine, why do we still have to wear masks? That seems to be, everyone wants to not wear masks. So Dr. Floyd?
So because the vaccine is none of the vaccines are 100% effective. So you can still get COVID and still transmit COVID, although not very commonly, after you've been vaccinated. So, and so it's just, kind of like how we discussed earlier, just, why do we wear seatbelts? It's very low risk of potentially having a car accident, but we still wear it. So we still need to wear our masks until we probably reach beyond herd immunity to where we can take off masks. But at this point, when we're still trying to fight a pandemic and our cases are still going up, people who are vaccinated, there's cases of active duty people who have been vaccinated and well beyond the 2 weeks who have recently gotten positive for COVID, the disease, and they are in isolation. So it is not 100% effective. So you still have to wear a mask to protect yourself and others.
And there's an important point to make that, like, the vaccine is one of the first steps you can take to get rid of this. Like, no one likes wearing this, right? I enjoy seeing the bottom half of everyone's faces, and I would like to see people smile or give me that look like that was way off. But we can't do that without first getting vaccines and reaching herd immunity. So if you want to get rid of this awesome look we've been sporting for a year, then attend meetings like this, make sure that you are well informed in what is happening with the vaccine, make sure that you understand what's happening. And if you have questions and you're unsure, that's what we're here for. Like, hopefully you took the opportunity when all of our names were up at the beginning to write it down. Like, we are all more than willing, more than happy to sit down and talk with you about any of your vaccine concerns, just concerns about COVID in general. So this is an opportunity for you to get as much information as you feel you need to make yourself comfortable with whatever decision you decide to make. And hopefully, at some point, we will reach herd immunity and we'll be able to remove these masks.
And I'll add two things. First, if you're so inclined, go out on the CDC website, and they actually give some different scenarios on mask wear. So there are scenarios where you don't have to wear your mask, but I'm going to temper all that with there's still a Department of Defense mandate to wear masks on federal installations. And so for all of you that live at the U.S. Air Force Academy, whether you're, and work here, we still have to, just because we've been told to. And that's kind of the world that we live in. Sometimes we have to do things that we don't always like. And so until the federal mandate from the Department of Defense is lifted, most of those CDC guidelines don't apply to the Air Force Academy. And as we move to, as those rule sets starts to change, then we can learn how to apply them here. But we do live in a little different of an environment, say, than a normal, a home that, you probably grew up in, where there's a small family group. So there are some different parts and pieces of that. The other question that was on here is, do I have to ROM? And for all you cadets, you know what ROMing means. So all of our summer programs thus far have ROM actually built into them. We already considered what ROM would look like if we did not have the vaccine or we weren't able to get everyone vaccinated. And so if you're not vaccinated and we have to apply those ROM rules, you don't have to give up leave. You'll come back to your program, but there may be a few more restrictions put on you just based on your status as we move through and we continue to learn more and more about the disease. I will say the summer is still a long way away, and so we have a lot to learn between now and May 30th. Let's see. Another question that I've seen here, getting back to some of the science, is does the vaccine change your DNA?
No, so we talked about this a couple of times now, about that central dogma of biology where you have DNA goes to RNA goes to protein. So that's a one-way street in humans. So you can't go from RNA back to DNA. So once you've started, like the RNA can only then become protein. So for the mRNA vaccine specifically, like that conversion back to DNA just isn't going to happen inside your cells. So you only are going to take that message from that vaccine and turn it into a protein. Now, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson, they actually use an adenovirus, so that is made up of DNA. But that DNA is not going to incorporate itself into your genome because it just doesn't have the machinery to do so. So there's very specific requirements for that to happen, and this vaccine doesn't have any of them. So even though it is DNA and it is able to get into the nucleus, which is that really guarded part where only DNA lives, basically, it doesn't do anything once it's in there, other than all of the enzymes and the machinery in your cells that recognize DNA say, oh, I should make this into RNA. And then that messenger RNA leaves your nucleus and then goes and gets made into protein. So in neither of those cases is there an opportunity for it to get incorporated into your genome. That's just not how we are set up with the machinery inside of our cells.
Oh, sweet.
All right. I think this question is probably for Major Floyd is, what would you say to those who are kind of scared of the side effects of just getting the vaccine? Because we've heard some stories about the, first dose, second dose.
Yeah, before I was fully vaccinated, I kind of like side effects, it's a small group, but at the table, we've all gotten our vaccines. I am the only one who's had the side effects. So, so I am a believer that there are side effects, but it's not going to happen to everyone. So the first dose, most people, if they do report side effects, is going to be a sore arm. So that's why we kind of, here at the Air Force Academy, we actually just for documentation purposes, just put it in the right arm. It's not, you can have it in your left arm if it's a medical reason. But we, for the most part, just for documentation and administration, we put it in the right arm because most people are right hand dominant. So we hope that you use that arm more. But yeah, maybe just a sore arm for a day or two. The second dose, there was a significant amount of people in the study. And just since I've given the vaccine to so many people so far, there's a significant portion who do have side effects. Most people are reporting it. That can happen usually about 12 hours after the dose. And it's just like flu-like symptoms. So some people feel a little feverish. Some people have a mild headache. Some people just don't feel very good and just are tired and want to sleep. And that was me. I was really impressed. I do think that hydration is really important. I unfortunately did not hydrate well enough that day because I was running around out of pod. So it kind of hit me a little harder. So I definitely encourage to not have those side effects, to just hydrate, drink lots of water and stuff beforehand. If you do have side effects, if you need to push through, like a lot of our first responders still need to do that, then, Tylenol, and if you need to, Motrin. But usually those side effects maybe last a couple hours, 6 hours for most, maybe 12 hours. If you had symptoms for more than 72 hours, then it's probably not from the vaccine. It's probably from getting another infection somewhere else. And so you need to get tested. But, there are plenty of people who have nothing, like my colleagues who I'm jealous of because I, thought I was pretty resilient. But but hydration is really important. And there are also some side effects. I've had some patients report just a mild stomach ache for like an hour. So it's really minimal, but I do want to say that we in the med group and with the superintendent's guidance is we are trying to offer your first dose for cadets. Like it was last week, we invited many. This week on the 8th of April, we're inviting many so that we can time it so that you can get your second dose before finals week. We're trying to get it to where you are not in that, couple hours of side effects if you do get it, so that you're not doing it during finals week. So I would recommend, we will be emailing and contacting people who had filled out the COVID questionnaire survey, COVID vaccine questionnaire. If we'd done it last week, it was mandatory, but we will be contacting you tonight based on your responses and hopefully inviting you to the vaccine pod, which is on Thursday, and offering that so that you can get your first dose in. Like I said, minimal side effects from the first dose, and the second dose in hopefully before the end of the month, so that therefore you're good to go to prepare for your finals week and that sort of thing. We do have other events going forward, but the timing of those may coincide, and also will affect, the operational impacts too, because you're fully vaccinated and fully protected per the CDC 14 days after the second dose.
And so if a cadet has said no, how can they change their answer to yes?
Yeah, so the COVID vaccine questionnaire that was sent out and was required is still a live document. So if you submit your forms now, we've already kind of pulled the data, but I will work with our leadership to see if there's any significant responses after tonight's event. But for the most part, we already have many people who are interested, so we're going to offer to the vaccine for Thursday. But at every pod, usually midway through, you can just ask your buddy who did get the email. We usually open it up to people who are newly interested, so first doses who didn't get an official email. We usually have a set time for each event. It changes slightly, so I would definitely recommend finding someone who's gotten the email to ask about that, or ask through your leadership. But for the most part, we usually open it up to, especially for our cadets, trying to get you through before finals week at a certain time of each pod event. So that's another option, is just show up, but we can't guarantee it beyond a certain time. So.
All right, quite a few questions on why in a young, healthy population of cadets who, I think we've talked about for a long time, they're not as susceptible to some of the harsher realities of COVID. Why would they need to get vaccinated? And I can repeat this if we need to. And if the older population is already getting vaccinated at such a high rate, why would the younger population have to get vaccinated to protect an already vaccinated population? So the question they're trying to ask is, why do young, healthy people have to get vaccinated?
So I would say it's because we live on planet Earth. We're part of a larger community. And so it's our responsibility we're trying to get what's called herd immunity. We're trying to protect those that are most vulnerable. And it's true that cadets may not be at high risk or in that category at all, but there are people that they're interacting with on a daily basis in the classroom, in the cadet wing, in the grocery store, when they're picking up food that are highly susceptible. And it's a responsible thing to be vaccinated and protect. We also don't know, this is the coronavirus that's going around. We've seen it is mutating. We have different strains and variants that are coming out, and we don't know that just because it's not hitting the young population hard right now, that it's going to stay that way. And so I would argue that everyone needs to get vaccinated to protect the most risky, and also just to develop your own protection as well, because we don't know what it's going to. I mean, we don't know that you're going to be protected just because you're at a young age.
And to piggyback onto what Dr. Steele said, so we also, originally we didn't think that people could get reinfected, and now we know that they can. So we don't know that. So if you're like me, I have had the vaccine and I have also had COVID. So my COVID was pretty mild. I lost my sense of taste. I lost my sense of smell, and it lasted for about 4 to 5 days. That doesn't mean that if I get it again, it will present in the same exact way. It doesn't mean that if I get it again and it's a different variant, that it'll present in the same exact way. So the longer this virus is allowed to persist in the community, the greater the chance of what Dr. Steele just said, of it mutating in a way that does affect some of the younger, healthier population. Because as it continues to replicate and infect more and more people, it's going to make mistakes. And those mistakes manifest as mutations that may impact the severity or may not, that may make it more transmissible or may not. We don't know, but those ones that end up being more transmissible, that end up being more severe, are generally the ones that then become dominant in a community. So as we're giving it the opportunity to make more and more copies of itself, we're also increasing the risk for everyone, regardless of if they've been vaccinated or not. Because as new variants emerge, there's no saying that the vaccines that we have now are going to be just as effective of them. Maybe we need an additional booster. Maybe we need to get something else. So while we can act now on the data we have, because the vaccines that we have are proven effective against some of the more transmissible variants, like the South Africa variant, we can have an opportunity now to get rid of the variants that we know are spreading, that we know we have really good efficacy against. And then we don't have to worry about it so much later, because it's going to become something that you don't really think about, like the cold or the flu. But until we reach that herd immunity, it's going to continue to move through our population and mutate at a rate that we can't predict what's going to happen. Just like vaccines are new, coronavirus disease 19 is also new. So we have no idea of predicting what's going to happen in the future. So again, you're young, you're healthy. Hopefully, if you had COVID, it was pretty mild. You may not have even known. You may have been one of those asymptomatic people, but that doesn't guarantee that that's what's going to happen in the future.
So, and you may have answered this, but I'm going to ask the question directly so if you've already had COVID, then what's the benefit of getting the vaccine? And then if you've had COVID within 90 days, that's a number that has been talked about a lot. Why are we vaccinating people within 90 days of having COVID?
Go.
Since I did it. So why would I get the shot even though I've already had COVID? Is that the gist of the question? Yes. So a lot of it is what I just talked about. But so getting the shot not only protects me, but because I'm less likely to develop a severe case, because I'm less likely to have some of those symptoms that would actually promote shedding or promote the virus spreading from person to person, I'm also less likely to transmit it. So I have a number of people in my family of various ages who I don't want to get coronavirus disease, regardless of how young and healthy or how old they are. So me getting the vaccine protects not only me, but it also helps me limit that spread. So even if you've already had it, well, then great, you have some immunity. Like, let's boost that immunity so that you don't have to worry about spreading it to someone else. And so that also you're then the next time you get it, it's a little bit easier to kind of predict what's going to happen because it should be mild, because now you've seen it 2 or 3 times if you've gotten both vaccines and you're having one of the 2 shots like Pfizer and Moderna. So now you will have seen it when you got it the first time, you will have seen it a second time with the first shot, and you will have seen it a third time when you get that second dose of that shot. So now your body should be pretty good at getting rid of it. So now you don't really have to worry as much. And a lot of those transmissibility and the potential effects of having COVID should be mitigated as much as you can reasonably expect them to be mitigated. Do you have anything you want to add?
No. Good. And if I understand it correctly, because there's a couple of questions about it, continues to go to masks and that, but the transmissibility of the disease it is still prevalent. It is still there, and you can still transmit it. But the vaccine also does help to reduce the transmissibility as well a little bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you think about it, if my body already knows how to, like, what's coming, like it already has identified the intruder, then the chance of me getting more and more of these viruses, like that overall number should hopefully be less because my body knows and it starts attacking it earlier. It also, a lot of the ways that things are spread is through aerosolization, right? So if I'm sneezing and coughing, like that's what masks are for. But if I've got my vaccine, then I'm probably not sneezing or coughing as much. Like a lot of those more overt symptoms, like I'm not getting those. So because I'm not sneezing and coughing, like that just brings the transmissibility down. So it's not anything different with the virus. It's just what is my body doing in response to the virus? And that is, it's not doing anything as much overt. It's a lot more internal as my immune system fights it off.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to go back to some policy type of questions. First, there's a couple questions is why is it mandatory? And it is not. The vaccine is not mandatory at all. While we are encouraging it by because we think there are some added benefits to it. It's absolutely not mandatory for anyone to get it. It's under emergency use authorization, and from that standpoint, we cannot require it, and thus it is not required. So I hope no one's walking away thinking that it is a mandatory vaccine. The other one that's come up a few times that's sporadic throughout here is why are we being penalized if we're not getting the vaccine? And I kind of see it a little bit differently. Is one, we are not penalizing anyone. What we are doing is simply following the medical and professional guidance that is offered to us by the CDC and our medical and science professionals. And so we've been learning and continually assessing everything really daily. I mean, there's not a day that doesn't go by where we learn a little bit. And so what we're doing is applying the science to what we know. And what is our real job is to get back to the mission at hand. And, you know, the mission is to make sure that we have the best cadet experience, to attain the best leadership opportunities, to athletic, airmanship, academic, all of those opportunities. We need to be able to continue to do that because we have a mission to produce nearly 1,000 lieutenants for the Air and Space Force every year. So we have to continue to do that mission, but we want to make sure that we can do it the best way that we can. And starting to back off of some of the COVID restrictions that have been in place are how we can get to that more normal. And quite frankly, we're not probably ever going to be back at a pre-COVID normal, but we're learning to work within this environment. So that's kind of the policy piece of that.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So they're not mandatory, but I want to take an opportunity to say that just because they're not mandatory doesn't mean that you should automatically say no. Like, as a former cadet here, it's really nice to feel like, oh, I have all of this agency, I can do whatever I want, I'm just going to say no. You can, but you're also expected to be a leader. So that's one of the reasons why you're here, so that you can gather that information to make an informed decision. Maybe the informed decision for you is still no, and that's fine. But vaccine hesitancy or reluctance is not something that's only like that COVID-19 has monopoly on. This is something that you're going to encounter as active duty airmen leading other airmen. So it's important now to understand the pros and cons, to weigh them for yourself and to make that decision. So yes, you do have the opportunity to say no, but you also have the opportunity to say yes, which is also something that you're not given a whole lot of opportunities to do. So don't just say, oh, this isn't required, I'm not going to do it. Come here, learn about vaccines, ask us whatever questions you have, like, we're happy to answer them. And then hopefully, even if you decide to say no, you have a more complete picture of why you're saying no and for the specific reasons. Or if you decide to say yes, hopefully you're able to articulate that to maybe your classmates, maybe your roommates, maybe your parents, your friends who are also on the fence. So like, either way you go, hopefully you're doing it with a lot more knowledge on the risks, the pros, the cons, so that you can make that informed decision that we're asking you to make, regardless of what you decide to do. Is that fair?
Thanks, Major Allen. That was a great point there on, and said much better than I did. Couple more things. If you get this vaccine, are you DNIF? Yes, you are DNIF for 48 hours from flying duties. So if you're an active flyer, which I am, it's a 48-hour DNIF. And just like any other, illness, if you get sick after that in a different environment, you go to the flight doc and they will decide whether or not you are fit to fly. That is what they do, is they judge the risk on whether or not you can go fly safely based on a lot of factors that I'm not even aware of. Should anyone coming to the Air Force Academy in the class of 2025 get vaccinated? We highly recommend it. And so you can get vaccinated. Again, it's a decision that you'll have to make personally, but you can get vaccinated if you want to prior to coming here. We do ask that you bring the documentation so we can put it in your medical records. And there will be a note going out to the appointees here in the next couple of days, hopefully, that will kind of highlight that. Let's see, we're getting to the end of the questions here. And so let me read through real quick to see if there's any that we haven't really. Here's a good one. Why isn't the vaccine mandatory for the Department of Defense? I think we kind of touched on that, but I'll let Major Floyd answer it specifically.
So while vaccines are under EUA status, the only one who can approve that would be the President of the United States, and he hasn't approved that is mandatory for active duty. So right now, we all still have the option to get the vaccine while it's under EUA status. There is thought that potentially once it's fully licensed and approved through the FDA, that it may become forced mandate, just like our annual flu vaccine, but we do not know that, and that's still being decided at higher levels. So.
All right, so I think, we had a lot of questions. We had a lot of great questions, and I really appreciate everyone's. Hopefully we answered most of your questions in here. I tried to kind of bring some of the most commonly asked questions out. A couple things to reiterate. One, I will reiterate again that it is not mandatory, all right? As Major Allman said, the whole purpose of this town hall was to help you make an informed decision. And that's all we want, is that you have a little bit more knowledge from some experts in the field to give you that knowledge. And if you need to reach out more, please do. They're all available to answer your questions. And there's many more experts here at USAFA. These aren't the only three. But they are certainly have been involved since the beginning of this and can answer your questions or get you the answer. Second, for those cadets out there who didn't volunteer, would like to volunteer, please either dig through your email and find the questionnaire that went out. As Major Floyd said, the link is still live. If not, talk to your AOC. All right, talk to me. I'll get you the link, please. And you can go ahead and we continually run the rosters to know that you were there. So if you have missed it in the past as well, if you were scheduled last week and didn't get it, please re-enter you're gonna have to re-enter your information most likely, or no?
No, so if you got the email last week from me, and you missed last week for whatever reason, you're still going to be actually included in this week's email because this week and last week we were trying to really give you that opportunity. So you'll still be on my list to be emailed. If you fill out the survey by Saturday, that's the list that we pulled. So if you didn't make it last week, we should be inviting you this week.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank everyone for taking an hour out of their evening to listen, participate. And I'd like to thank the panel of experts here that volunteered their time as well to provide this. And in fact, these are the three that requested this because they had heard so much information and requests from cadets that we decided it was best that we were able to just provide it to all the cadets, permanent party, and anyone else who was able to join. So I, again, truly appreciate it. For anyone, we are going to post this this chat onto the usafa.edu website in the next day or two with the link. So you'll be able to go back and read it and get all those questions answered if you need to. With that, again, thank you for your time and have a great evening.